Okay, it is 11:30. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Blue Cirrus's August webinar, Too Hot, Too Cold, or Just Right. Today, Michelle will be discussing virtual visit platforms, their effectiveness, and how to choose which may be right for you and your organization. Michelle has over 20 years of experience in healthcare IT and is the managing partner at Blue Cirrus Consulting. For the last 7 years, she has dedicated her efforts to the development of telehealth strategies for healthcare. She is active in HIMSS, where she's held roles as the South Carolina chapter president, vice chair of the Eastern Region, public policy, and chapter advocate. She has worked diligently through HIMSS to educate the industry and the public on healthcare IT policy, the future of IT strategic direction, and that includes telehealth. A couple of things before we get started. First and foremost, we're happy that you were able to join us today. It is the end of August and a beautiful summer. All of the attendees, you guys are currently on mute and you will remain on mute for the entire presentation. Just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and if you have questions, please feel free to submit them to the chat box and we will answer those at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Amanda. I apologize. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I was having a little bit of technical issue there for a second. Okay. So first of all, I wanted to meld together kind of a fun topic of the Three Little Bears with video conferencing or video visit tools. And the reason I wanted to meld them with this particular tale or a story that we have as children is because it depends on your organization and the types of things that you need as an organization, which might make it too hot or too cold or just right for you. So I'm hopeful during this presentation that we'll walk through several pieces of criteria that will help you, and that will allow you to make better decisions as you look at your virtual visit platforms, either one that you've selected today that you may want to make changes to, or that you may want to make a change, or for a virtual visit platform that you need to select, that you need to at this point based on the needs and the usage of your organization. So I like to use topics and types of characters that are familiar to us so we can all meld them into that theme. A couple of things that I think are important to just kind of set the stage. We've talked about this before, but the clinical adoption statistics for telehealth, of course, during the pandemic have just gone skyrocketing. The volume is a 37% increase, and it may even be higher than that now. We're seeing, these numbers are back into April and May, and so we're seeing, massive differences in numbers for sure in terms of the adoption statistics for clinicians, because all of us that have been in telehealth previously or are getting into it have looked at the work that's been done, and we see that adoption statistics had been lagging. So now we see a tremendous amount of adoption from clinicians. And patient adoption is also increasing. So this is driving pressure to a virtual visit platform. We need to meet the patients where they are. And patients are, in fact, plugging in some for the first time during the pandemic. So you can see for usages, almost 52% in the last couple of months. But we know that clinical adoption statistics are now at the end of, and I shouldn't say end, but during the pandemic now, when we are learning how to do things a little bit differently. We've adjusted, and folks are starting to think, well, I'm okay to take patients back in the office. So we're seeing some of the adoption statistics going back down. And of course, some uncertainty related to reimbursement has driven that. So where will that equilibrium live? And I think that's a big question for everyone. Certainly when we're dealing with our clients and the work that we're doing, we're seeing somewhere in the neighborhood of a 40% adoption rate for 40% of their visits being done via telehealth and 60% being done face-to-face. But of course, the key is helping clinicians understand the value, because if all we're doing is developing replacement for in-person visits, then that's not going to show a lot of value for a clinician. They need to know that this isn't just a replacement for face-to-face visit. We know there's been a ton of things going on in the last few months. Why telehealth is here to stay, and Seema Verna testifying that we can't imagine going back. But then in another testifying, in another testimonial, Secretary has said that that in-person care is the gold standard, and if in-person care is a gold standard, and we're trying to jump towards that, then there's a perception that perhaps telehealth is less than. So that's not the case. We all know that, or we should know that. This is not the difference between patients getting care in one way versus another. And a lot of times it's because they haven't gotten any care at all. And in this case, during our pandemic time, the safety of everyone involved. So it's not, again, just the replacement of, in some cases, it's the only option for care. And in many times, it's a better quality option. So from a market pressure perspective, because the virtual visit platforms are so prolific, that is because of the market growth that we've seen. So Fortune Business Insights has done some global market estimates looking at 2026 at $266 billion for telehealth market growth. Product and services has actually been updated, and services is exceeding products for the first time ever. This is showing a 50-50, but in fact, it's higher than that. So we know that market pressures, market growth, investment is driving the amount of solutions that we have in the market. And we don't just have, Nike and Reebok. We don't just have two choices. There are several choices in the market for a virtual visit platform. And of course, North America is dominating the market from a telehealth perspective. However, we know from our work at Blue Cirrus, and then others as well, know that Europe, Asia, and particularly in Latin America and the Middle East, we're seeing a massive increase in the amount of telehealth work that we can even do from the United States to those areas, as well as them providing care to their own patients in their own areas. In addition, the market growth for patient statistics, they've also exceeded this market up to 2027, $26 billion today. So that's just the North American market. We know that American Well earlier this year landed the $200 million to continue to keep up with market demand. We know that Teladoc has recently purchased Livongo to roll out or to round out some of their service offerings. In an extraordinary deal, $18 billion, of course, based on a lot of the investment that's in the market. We know that investors are constantly looking at this market, determining what to do with it. And then finally, we know that in the last couple of days, we've seen that American Well is going to go public with a $100 million boost from Google. And what will Amazon do? What will Microsoft do in the future? What will some of these other companies do in the future? We don't know what the end result will be, but what we know is that it is creating pressure related to the virtual visit platforms, which means that there's just more choice from healthcare providers. It's driving more innovation. It's driving more flexibility in the market. It's driving price, and is allowing for providers and clinicians to be able to have a plethora of choices in the market. And so we've just talked about two of the high profile ones that are in the market. However, there are many, many others, and we'll talk about those in a moment. We're going to have more market compression. So watching this space will be very important for you and your organization. I think that we'll see other vendors who have niche market combining together, being purchased or merging together for the purposes of competing in the market. I think we'll see healthcare organizations compress their real estate. We know that with more and more people working remotely, we'll see less need for brick and mortar buildings, which again means more remote or tele services. We also will see resource compression with those remote workers. So if you are working remotely, then perhaps we don't need as many people to manage that in a facility. So lots and lots of compression happening in the industry, which will of course free up resources, dollars, capital, as well as people to do different things in terms of the services that are provided. So the industry merges in telehealth, I think, will come fast and furious over the next 6 months. And there'll be even more consolidation of those services. So if there's currently a remote patient monitoring solution, I think they will be looking for some kind of virtual visit platform to partner with. If there's interoperability needs, which will continue to be a pressure in the healthcare industry, then they'll look for partners to be together with them in this competitive world that we see out here in telehealth. But many of you have, or many of the folks that we have worked with and have interacted with, and perhaps some of you have already purchased something quickly to respond to the market and to respond to the pandemic in particular. And if we're looking at our purchasing experience, we may have buyer's remorse. And in some cases, it may have been a quick fix. We needed to just respond to that moment and to the things that were needed at that time. And now we have some buyer's remorse related to that solution. So how do you avoid buyer's remorse now that you may want to make a different decision or perhaps purchase something completely different or new? Look at your contract terms. I can't tell you how many times we've looked at contract terms. Make sure you understand them. And those contract terms will sometimes have small hidden pieces in there that increase your cost. Or those contract terms are too simple, and the simplicity of those terms make them not tight enough for you as an organization to understand what you will receive. So making sure you look at those contract terms and require service level agreements. Service level agreements are a needed function in a telehealth solution. And that is because we have a lot of different users, of course, that are going to be utilizing this system, and we need to know that they can be supported. Understanding those payment terms. Sometimes there are some gotchas in there, and you've got to watch out whether or not you've got initial fees or ongoing fees. Are there fees for your patients? Are there fees for your providers? And we're going to talk a little bit about that and specific vendors in just a moment. And review multiple vendors. Don't be in a rush. Take the time. Don't just call the local other hospital that you may do referrals to and ask them what they're utilizing, because you're a little bit different than they are, and you may need to get a little bit different system. Get some referrals. I think that getting referrals from other clients from that vendor is really important. We often hear when we're working with facilities that, you know, we're talking to other facilities and find out that maybe the experience wasn't as good, or perhaps I can tell you in some of our experiences, some of the vendors that we've worked with, and I won't call out too many folks here today, but we've worked with that have had, you know, project management challenges, and so not able to actually deliver what they were contracted to deliver. And if that's the case, then replace that project manager. And once that project manager was replaced, then that project continued much more smoothly. So just watch and pay attention to multiple vendors, get those references and the nuances related to that, and do some demos based on the key features that you want. When you're in a vendor selection process, sometimes when you're doing demonstrations, you'll see vendors wanting to demonstrate what they want to show you, their latest and greatest fun thing. But really you need to get down to the core of what you need and make them show you what you want to see, not necessarily the new fancy shiny thing that they want to look at. And of course, get an unbiased evaluation. That could be through a process with a partner like a Blue Cirrus, or you could be doing that internally if you have a good rigor around selecting vendors. And as I said, don't rush. So when we've got something that's too hot, that could be because we need to have, we may have some danger zone happening there. We need to have some commitment from our vendors related to interoperability, but maybe not so far as going 100% inside of our EHR. A lot of times these virtual visit platforms don't need to be 100% inside the EHR because we're doing scheduled and non-scheduled visits. And those non-scheduled visits are the ones that kind of hang you up inside of an EHR. And what's your service level agreement? I can tell you that we have a vendor today that we're working with that really does not have a service level agreement. They have a verbal agreement that they're going to definitely answer every single call. But for a health system that may be 200 beds or above, or even 100 beds and above, that might be very difficult for them to deal with. That is going to be very difficult for them to deal with. You need to have something where you have some support. If you are an individual physician office, then perhaps you can deal with that level of ambiguity and not necessarily worried about that. But larger organizations need to have some more rigor around the service level agreements and uptime commitments of at least really 96, 97, 80, 98%. Anything lower than that, you're going to see a tremendous amount of downtime, and that's going to cause you to have problems with adoption, both from the physician as well as the patient. Really, you want to see it around 98%, but I was trying to be a little bit more easy there in my percentages. But in payment terms, what do those look like? Are those by visit? Are they monthly? Are they by provider? And is that when you do your ROI, when you look at your projections for the cost, is that going to be a sustainable solution for you? And depending on your organization, if you're a large health system with lots and lots of providers, then perhaps you don't want a term like that because you've got a lot of expense related to providers that may not have adoption. Maybe you want to look at it per visit. Maybe you want to look at it as a monthly cost, depending on the amount of usage you might see. And is this particular vendor actually a competitor with you? So do they have agreements with organizations that would cause them to be competitive with you? Do they provide virtual visits for the local insurance company, for example? This is a warm day here in South Carolina, as Amanda mentioned, and I have my window just cracked open so I can hear a little bit out there. Data storage, where is that data stored? Sometimes you'll hear from these virtual visit platform companies that they're storing data, but they're not storing data, but they are in fact storing data. And where are they storing that data? Is that on an AWS platform? Is that in some server that is offshore? God forbid. So how long do they store that data? So this is an important point, and you need to investigate this. I can tell you that we've done a lot of work in various systems, and those systems, there are some systems that will tell you that they're not storing data, but in fact they are, just for a short period of time, and that is something to consider. That's an area that will cause you to potentially have some angst related to some security concerns there. And then access to that data. Can you run a report? Can you audit who has utilized the system? How many visits each physician has done? Can you actually see that the physician did that particular visit? so that you can get down to drill down to that particular level. If you can't audit and report at that level, then it's very difficult for you to do any error correction for physicians on their visits. And it's also difficult for you to be able to respond to any discovery that might happen with any cases that may, any legal cases that may come up. And then the latest one that we're hearing now is recording of visits. There are a couple of times where recording of a visit might be clinically appropriate. In some cases, that could be I've heard in behavioral health areas, for example, there are a couple of cases. However, in most cases, that's not the case. And can you control the recording of that visit? And do you as an organization want that to happen at all? And unfortunately, we've got a couple of vendors out there that are, or at least one that I know of that is recording, will be opening up recording of visits. So lots of stuff to consider there. And to stop that from being just a little bit too hot for your security and privacy group. So what's too cold? Privacy and security of data, as we just talked about. This is a key area that we're seeing as the market is continuing to expand. We're seeing more and more vendors in the market. They're fresh in the market. They've just grown exponentially in the market. Even the large vendors are pressured. They're hiring new staff. They're seeing investor pressures. They have goals that they have to make from an investment perspective. And just because it's the Nike of telehealth or the big names, that doesn't mean that they're the right solution for you. So if they're not responsive vendors, that you call them and you don't get a call back right away, or you email them and you don't get responses right away, that's giving you the cold shoulder. Are there hidden fees in your contracts? Again, not good partnership. Is there a lack of transparency? And I'm writing these down. We're writing these down because these are things that we have found in the virtual visit world. And many of our clients are struggling with this today and looking for an alternative. Where are the gotchas? Did I need more resources? Does that vendor have a roadmap for where this system is going to go? Are we going to see, integration with a language platform? Are we going to be able to have family members on a visit with the patient? Will we be able to easily transfer them from one specialist to the other? Can we have a group meeting, a group therapy visit, for example? If that type of questioning, that those types of roadmaps are not defined and not necessarily verbally, that's not, you can't take that to the bank. Where's the roadmap on a document? Those are things that'll leave you out in the cold later on. Customer groups or a lack of system control. So if there's not customer groups helping to evolve that system, that tell you that they're a little bit more of an immature organization and aren't ready yet for the feedback from their customers. In addition, you may have, an overseeing type of lack of control of the system. So that vendor controls so much of it that you're not actually able to make adjustments at the level and fine detail that you need to. Some of the major considerations, because if you're going after as a health system or a health care provider, if you're going after those vendors and you want to have the bare honeypot, you might need to see what those fees are that you may come across as you get the right vendor and some of those considerations. And these considerations we're going to look at in the larger scheme of things in the next couple of slides by vendor. So are they interoperable? So some people will say, well, interoperability is, maybe not all that it's cracked up to be. Interoperability is a key factor of creating systems integrated together, and without that interoperability, we're going to see systems being created outside and individual silos all over again, beyond what we saw with meaningful use. Now, do we need to have our telehealth, everything in our telehealth systems done in an EHR? That's not the definition of interoperability. A definition of that as a vendor, if you're on the line listening to this, is that you actually have some deep interoperability, not just ADT or specific demographic information, but you do have that visit level, that actual documentation and data, information, pictures, et cetera, and that those are transferred over to the source of truth where that EHR is. And we talked about this: contract terms, payment terms, privacy and security. But is this a video conferencing tool, or is this an asynchronous type of visit tool? And this is an interesting nuance, I think, because some organizations might look at the video conferencing tools or video visit tools as the end all be all. But in fact, in some cases, you can do much of what you're looking to do via an asynchronous visit, where patients are able to answer questions, select information, and they're able to, then you're able as a clinician to be able to look at that information and distill whether or not that patient needs to come into the office, or if they're a already established patient, that you can send them a prescription refill or a new prescription for something that's fairly easy to do. Is this a virtual visit platform, and is this a direct consumer platform? Those are two separate items. Virtual visit platform would allow you to provide a video conferencing, that real-time, real space tools for you and your patient. Direct consumer allows for that, but it's at a fee-for-service credit card swipe basis. So the systems are actually operating differently, and you'll see vendors in the market operating differently because of that. They may not be a direct consumer solution because they're not going to be necessarily all public facing or allowing patients to be able to reach them at any one moment, but they want to be able to do those scheduled visits and non-scheduled visits through a virtual visit platform, not necessarily have a credit card swipe. Can you white label that system? Most of the vendors today can white label the system and have your logo listed there. In addition, can you use your own providers, or do they bring providers to the table if that's what you need in your organization? Which, don't be afraid of using those external providers. Often they can help you bridge the gap, and to be honest, you can take and see what they do and learn, and then you can take that yourself, and eventually they can be gone and you do that all on your own. So you gain that knowledge from that vendor, and helps you bridge to that next level. So don't look at that always as a negative, but that's certainly something to consider in your organization, whether culturally that would be accepted or not. Does it do on-demand or scheduled visits, as we talked about? And this multi-party video is becoming more and more important for folks as it evolves. So a bit like what we've seen with televisions, where we all didn't have smart TVs, but now we need to have Netflix on our televisions, right? So it's a little bit like that, when everybody needs to have these multi-party videos now to be able to bring patients, families, specialists, other caregivers into that visit. So lots of considerations that you want to think about. So I'm going to reveal a few of these as we go through. But this is an exhaustive list. And as we've talked about already, there are tons and tons of vendors in this market. So this is one list. There's certainly others. You may notice that Zoom isn't on here. And that is because it's a video conferencing tool, although there are others that are simply video conferencing tools on here. But what we found with Zoom is the amount of work that they have with schools and businesses, and of course their Zoom bombing and privacy issues, they've become less and less desirable in the healthcare space, and they're just too preoccupied really with some of the other types of lines of business that they have. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but we're going to go through it. We won't go through each individual one, but it'll allow you to see it as we reveal each section. So one of the things I wanted to point out, as we talked about, is it a video conferencing tool, meaning does it do real-time video visit? Does it have a patient per visit cost, or is it a direct consumer type of, does it have that direct consumer type of option there, and can you white label it? And where you see the green X fields, those are, yes, they do. Those that are black or red, or they don't have that. And those that are white is because we don't know yet. We're still looking for that. And in the case of InTouch and Levy, we only see international with Levy, and then of course InTouch has recently been purchased by Teladoc, so that information is contained in the Teladoc line item. But one of the things I wanted to point out here is that you know, most of these systems are in fact video conferencing tools. And in the case of BrightMD, for example, that's an asynchronous tool. So their smart exam tool is asynchronous, and it allows you to do the question and answer that we talked about. So that allows you to manage resources, not necessarily doing a video conference, but almost all of the others do allow you to do a video conferencing. Patient per visit cost, it's a smattering in there depending on what you're looking for, but for the most part, most of them have some kind of pay per visit cost, some kind of direct to consumer. In the case of VitalNet, for example, they don't do that because they're not a direct to consumer solution. They're a partner with a health system or a healthcare provider. So they're not actually doing a direct to consumer model there. And then white labeling, most of them do, some don't. As you can see, they have the model there, but they'll put your logo on as well. A couple of other things that are here are, do they offer providers? That doesn't, if it's green or red, it depends on what you want, as we said. So organizations that are looking to bridge or expand their service providing, their service offerings, that may be a key function for them. But if you're a critical access hospital, for example, you may not need to have primary care providers or internists or things like that. So that column, it depends on your organization. But historically, if you want to bridge, if you want to expand, you want to have some additional providers. Are your providers permitted to use the software? Sometimes these vendors only allow their providers to be on that software. So if they are in fact say for example, a psychiatric system software provider, then they're the only ones that are going to be putting data into that system or utilizing that system. But that's pretty across the board. Most of them do allow that the use of that software for the providers. And integration into the EMR. Again, integration can be, again, if it's white, we don't know right now, and in some cases it's only one vendor or one type of service that they're doing. In the case of AMD is ePrescribe, and in the case of Caregility, right now we're seeing that as Epic only. And we're happy to be educated if other people have other information. This is evolving, as you can imagine. But what's important to know here is integration with an EMR is dependent on the level of integration. So for you, you know, as we've talked about already, you want to have, yes, demographic information, but more information available from that visit so that we're not creating a standalone telehealth system that contains information that we have to pull over in a PDF, for example. Integration with an EMR needs to be more than just pulling information over in a PDF. And then lastly, now that we're looking at these last four, it's both supporting on-demand and scheduled visits. Most of those systems will do that and will support in both cases. In the case of TytoCare, for example, at the bottom, they're not supporting that because those are specific scheduled visits that are happening with that system. And the data reporting capabilities, excuse me, when we look at something like, and let me go down to the Microsoft Teams area where we have kind of an orange color on several of these items for supporting on-demand and scheduled visits and data reporting. It's orange right now because they're reporting that they do that, but we haven't actually been able to visualize that ourselves. So right now we're seeing that reported. So if anyone has seen that, we'd be open to learning as well. And then at the top under the DoxyMe, session, we'll see the data reporting capabilities. They will report that they have data reporting capabilities. Their reporting capabilities are very light. And in addition, they are not doing multi-party video as well right now. Their systems are fairly immature, and they've grown very quickly in the last couple of months with the demands around telehealth. And there are some concerns, of course, around their data reporting capability, as well as some of the privacy and security concerns that we talked about earlier. So there is a variety of systems. Not all of them have this multi-party video option, which, as we talked about, is kind of becoming the new norm. And some we are still investigating, but that's where we're all headed to. So we'll see. Sometimes for some organizations, this may be important and others not. But in the case of, so for example, translation, that's becoming a standard of practice, is to have translation services as well as the video of the patient and the physician all in the same, sort of time and space. And the goal for this document is that you're able to, take this and, it's of course a first cut. It's a blunt instrument here. It's a yes, no, it's a maybe. And in some cases, yes, no, there's nuances around that, but it does allow you to at least look at it from a first cut. But there are certainly nuances in each of these systems, but we can talk about that offline as well. So how are you going to know what's just right? We talked about what was too hot, what was too cold, and now we're looking at what's just right. We need to look at what's right sized for your organization. So are the big names right for you? Or will a name that you maybe didn't hear about that you saw today on that spreadsheet, maybe they would work for you? There are not just two virtual visit platforms in the market. There are, I can tell you, a couple of clients that we've just done vendor selections for. They've had over 25 vendors included in their vendor selection, and ultimately down to 4 or 5 that are going to be doing demonstrations. And that's a good thing for providers. So the market pressures, the market investment that we talked about is a great move forward for your organization to be able to pick the right vendor. Making sure that they're flexible. Are they willing to change based on your needs? Are you able to see and make comments to them? Hey, we need this new change. We need this. When will that be? Are the contract terms equitable? That doesn't mean it's all one-sided for a facility, but contract terms on both sides. Are they fair and equitable between the two organizations? And those payment terms that don't have gotchas. Worst thing you can ever do as a vendor to a client is to give them an invoice that they weren't looking for and they didn't know was coming. And so making sure that your payment terms are clear from a vendor perspective, as well as understanding them from the client perspective. And they need to prioritize you and have a partnership with you. That will create a just right relationship between you and your vendor. Some final thoughts from my perspective on the industry and where I think we're going. We know that there's been recently some of the CMS changes related to reimbursement that is impacting, or CMS proposed changes that we need to comment on. All of us on this line need to go on and comment on some of the changes, those reimbursement codes that are being proposed to be made permanent, those for deletion, and the new codes that have been defined. And we know because of this uncertainty, and of course the uncertainty related to election years, that this is causing some concern inside the market for telehealth, even though we're seeing a lot of investment. And we know that there's some adoption. Some of the physicians, clinicians that are utilizing telehealth are, concerned about reimbursement. What will it look like afterwards? And from my perspective, I think we're going to see telephone visits not be paid for in the long term. So driving towards a video visit, an asynchronous visit, a real-time visit as well, those are going to be key. Also having those multi video platforms where you can have multiple people in the same time and space on the video side. So driving away from backstop to a telephone visit to be paid, that now we need to jump that to best practice where we're at the video visit platform. So some of my thoughts on that, please make sure that you comment on in the public comment period. That's important. That's the only way that CMS and HHS know what's happening, and clinical data is extremely important in this case, and we all have new data now as we've been working together. I do want to thank all of our healthcare heroes that are on the call today and those that we work with every day. You all are doing a wonderful job and are heroes every day during this unprecedented public health emergency. Here's my contact information. I talked faster than I anticipated, but I know we have a couple of questions, but feel free to contact me. Also follow us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook. We are always active on all of those, sharing articles, sharing fun things, and feel free to call or reach out anytime. And Amanda, do we have some questions out there?
We do. One is video. Do you have that on that list that you were showing, Michelle?
I don't think I do. VidWio was not on there. It is an integrator. But yeah, we need to make sure we add VidWio as well. It is an integrator, and a lot of times with the Epic particularly, we see that being utilized, but we should add VidWio as well.
Great. The other one is, have you seen or heard anything about the Mend platform? It's very intriguing.
No, I'm not familiar with Mend at all. Is it a specific specialist type of platform? In other words,
that question comes from Amy Hermes. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay, Amy from Wise Healthcare. Is that a specific software for your healthcare system, or is it for? Let's see if we can unmute her. We'll allow you to talk, Amy.
Hi, so from what I've looked at, I just looked at a preview online of it yesterday. It seems to be kind of newer, but it does offer a lot of capabilities for video conferencing, including text reminders that your visit's there, being able to text your appointment link to the patient, online paperwork that you could do your patient forms online rather than having to mess with the jumble of how to get consent signed if that becomes a written rule again. So yeah. I just wondered what you had seen about it. It has so many features. We do have a demo set up, so I should learn more, but I wanted to see what your take was on it.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. I haven't. I know that there are several vendors because of the market that we see, as I just, reviewed earlier. There are several vendors that are coming up in the market, or vendors that exist in the market, but they're now putting on like a sidecar of telehealth. So that's what I would be looking for in that demo. Is this a bit of a sidecar, or is it out there, doing its own platform, or is there more to see there? If anyone on the call has any experience with Mend, we can certainly learn from each other as well.
Great. And then one other question, will vendors have an opportunity to send updates to the vendor chart for some of the areas in question?
We would love that. Yes, absolutely. 100%. Anybody can send us information. We're constantly gathering. As I said, this is always a work in progress. And we'll publish this webinar, but if you have some specific changes that you want to put forward to request, then we can make those changes before we publish that out to some of the other platforms that we would normally publish this out to. It's a good question.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. That is all the questions we have at this time. I would like to let everyone know, like Michelle said, that this webinar will be available on our website in the Knowledge Tsunami section. It will probably 24 to 48 hours, and then you'll be able to find it there. We do try and host a webinar every month, and if there's ever a topic that you feel like you would like more information on, you kind of would like us to do the digging, please feel free to send us that request, and you can either send that to Michelle directly or you can send that to info@bluecirrus.com. And thank you guys so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks everybody for attending.